right, the concept in today's video we're going to discuss is called equitable interest. It is a concept that you need to know for the real estate licensing exam, but you also have to know it for just the profession as well. This concept is part of the everyday life of a real estate professional. And it's most common where we see it is in the buyer-seller transaction. So let's kind of map out what I'm talking about here. So in a transaction, a typical transaction, we have the seller and the buyer. Now, as I discussed in a previous video that was titled, it was the parties to a contract, and I'll leave a link down below in the video description. The parties to a real estate contract are going to change depending on where they're at in the process. So let me give you an example here. Initially, when we're doing the negotiation, the buyer is the offeror, they're giving the offer, and the seller is the offeree because they're receiving the offer. Once the deal is put together and the purchase agreement is signed, then the seller legally becomes what's known as the grantor, and the buyer is legally known as the grantee. All right? Now this happens when the purchase contract has been agreed to. All right? So from contract date to the closing date, that period is where the buyer has what's called equitable interest. Equitable interest. Now the seller is the legal title holder. And remember, title in real estate means ownership. So the seller has actual title, but in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks down the road, the buyer who has a contract to purchase, they also have an interest, a legal interest in that property. And what do we call it? We have to call it something, and it's called equitable interest. And that's the most common, commonly where we see the concept of equitable interest. All right? The next thing I want to talk about is what's called assignments of contracts, because this plays into this concept here. So we know that the buyer has equitable interest. That means at some future point in this purchase contract, they're going to close on the property and become the actual title holder. But let's say the buyer isn't going to be the one that ends up closing on it. So let me give you an example here. So what can happen is the grantee, who has the equitable interest, can assign that interest to someone else. It's called assignment. Assignment of a contract. All right? So when that happens, the buyer, who's right now the grantee, because they have the equitable interest, well, their names change. They become the assignor, A-S-S-I-G-N-O-R, and then this person over here becomes the assignee. So we have grantor, grantee in the purchase contract, and then the grantee, who has the equitable interest, assigns their equitable interest to someone else. Now understand in this scenario that every real estate contract, with the exception of a listing contract, can be assigned unless the contract specifically prohibits it. So that means purchase contracts can be assigned, lease agreements can be assigned, mortgages can be assigned, options can be assigned. All of those are real estate contracts that are assignable. Now what happens here is the assignee, this third party, is responsible to carry out the terms of the purchase contract. So it is not an opportunity to renegotiate the terms of that contract. All right, so again, the grantor, unless the purchase contract specifically said the contract is not assignable, the grantor has no power to prevent the grantee from assigning the contract to someone else. And remember, the legal terms change, so once the assignment happens, the grantee or the buyer is called the assignor. That's a key real estate term. And the party receiving the contract is the assignee. Now, why is this important? Or let me give you an example of when this is beneficial. Let's say that let's say that Warren Buffett wants to buy your house. So you own a little house down on 2nd and Main Street that the actual market value is $50,000, right? If you know Warren Buffett wants your house, now what is the price of your property? If you know Warren Buffett wants it, all of a sudden you're going to want $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. Warren Buffett just wants to pay fair market value. So they can use a process called the Strawman process to accomplish this. And let me show you what I mean. So we know that the final buyer or the signee is going to be Warren Buffett, right? Again, Warren Buffett isn't going to go and ask because that $50,000 house is going to, you know, the owner's going to want $300,000, $400,000 for it. So he gets his, what Warren Buffett does is he gets his chauffeur, Tom, to pose as a buyer, go to the seller and say, I want to buy your house, I'll give you a fair market value, I'll give you $50,000. The seller doesn't know Tom other than Tom. Tom's just Tom, right? So they do a purchase agreement. The contract is agreed to. Once it's agreed to, Tom becomes the grantee, and the contract is assignable. So then Tom immediately assigns the contract over to Warren Buffett. There's nothing the seller can do about it. It's allowed unless the contract says it's not. Now, Warren Buffett can't change the terms. So maybe the contract was for $50,000, cash deal, closing in 14 days. So Warren Buffett would have to adhere to all those original terms of that purchase contract. And that is an assignment and an example of when someone might use a strawman. Now, strawmans are used all the time in places like Hollywood because obviously the same concept applies. If you know that Brad Pitt wants to buy your house, then the price all of a sudden goes up beyond market value. So that's why they are used and one reason why they're allowed. Now, if you want to learn more about assignments, like assignments of lease and those type of things, check out this video right here. It will clearly explain the concept a little bit better.